Hello, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Jeanne White is the producer and writes the blog. Folks, you're going to want to stay tuned to this show because this is going to be a different perspective. I have often said that children are the hidden casualties of this war on Alzheimer's. And by children, it could even be adult children, such as my own son, Joshua. The younger the parent, the younger the adult child is going to be. And they really, I think, need to do research on the long-term effects of adult children and young children who face this war. And yes, it is a war. I can tell you that personally. It's a war to keep your sanity, and it's a war to keep your health intact. And I am so touched and inspired by my special guest and how he writes about his dad. Every time I read, I just could tear up because my guest reminds me of my son. And I want to welcome Joe Dulin to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you so much, Betsy. And you know, you're an inspiration to so many people out there. And you know, I follow all the things that you write, and just you inspire so many people to speak out about the terrible devastation that this disease causes for, you know, caregivers, for children, for the people going through it. So I appreciate being on the show and appreciate everything you've done for the cause as well.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. I want you to talk about your dad. From what I read about your dad, he's a wonderful man. Wonderful. And I would like for you to tell the audience some background about your dad and how it started, and we'll go from there. And I really would like your perspective as an adult, I say child, because to me, you know, you're my son's age. So, you know, from a son's perspective, a daughter might be a little different, but from a son's perspective and how it's affecting your life. So,
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah,
for sharing.
So, let me get started. You know, so I'm 36. So my dad is actually still alive. He's in the very late stages of this disease. So, you know, every day that we have left with him, I consider a blessing. No matter, you know, what this disease causes, the person's still there, I think. And you know, a little bit about kind of our journey. My dad was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 12 years ago. So at the time, I was 24 years old. Navigating the first part of this disease at 24 was really hard because while my dad was diagnosed 12 years ago, I think that there had been some early signs before that. And so, you know, I had to help my mom a lot with kind of navigating retirement. He was still working when he was diagnosed. So a little bit about the story. So, and kind of how we found out. My dad had been going through, you know, it was a weird situation where he's a teacher and coach for 25 years, and he was just really struggling with the classroom staying organized, adapting to new technology, just being the great teacher that he was. And my mom and I went down to his classroom one night, and it was just so chaotic, and grades weren't entered in the system, and things just were really out of place, and we knew something was wrong. So at that point, my mom and I reached out to the administration of the school and said, hey, just something's not right with him. You know, he's so disorganized. He's been a phenomenal teacher and coach and mentor for so many kids for so many years. Just something's not right. And you know, they said, yeah, we've kind of noticed something, but at the same time, he looks normal. He looks healthy. So we're think maybe, you know, he's fine. And that's one of the things with Alzheimer's. I say in some of my posts, you know, when people get diagnosed with cancer, the school and places, they rally around them. But with Alzheimer's, because it's a mental illness and the person physically looks fine, there's so much, people just look at it like we were treated like we were trying to scan the system. It really felt like that. And for someone who's given so much love to a school for 25 years, it was really shocking for us to be treated that way. But we went to a doctor, a neurologist, and we're sitting there talking to the neurologist, and she looks at us and says, I think you're in the early stages of cognitive decline. And we're just like, okay, well, what does that mean? And she gets real quiet and real serious, and she says, well, it's the first stages of Alzheimer's. And we're Alzheimer's. He's 54 years old. How can someone who's 54 have Alzheimer's? Isn't that a disease of, that impacts older people? Like, that can't be right. That can't be right. And they say, no, it can affect young people. It's rare, but it happens. And just the shock of that, and I really do think it talks about my dad's character. My dad's biggest concern at that moment was kind of the impact it would have on my mom and I. So it was definitely a shocking experience for us at the time that a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So we go back to the school, and they get the results, and they say, well, that we don't believe that. That's not true. And we're just like, huh? And they ask us, well, will you get a second opinion? And we say, absolutely. Like, with something so big and such a big part of health, we're happy to get a second opinion. And, hey, if they're going to send it to us and pay for it, we're happy to do that. So we go to another neurologist, and the neurologist looks at the thing and says, yep, like, unfortunately, that's the diagnosis. I agree. And so we're mentally processing all that, and we go back to the school, and the school says, no, we still don't believe it. And we're just, at that point, my mother is handling it better than I am. I'm getting really frustrated that they're kind of questioning our integrity and questioning why would we be, like, he was within probably 3 or 4 years of retiring anyway. So, like, I didn't see what they thought we'd have to benefit from this. So we go to another neurologist, and they just keep saying the same thing. And at that point, the school finally put him on disability and administrative leave for the next year and a half, and then he was able to retire, which is kind of a blessing. A lot of people aren't in that situation. So that was kind of the first step of our diagnosis and kind of the first step of this journey for us.
Wow. That, I can't, it just makes me so mad when people don't believe someone, and I have experienced that with my husband's journey, but Matt's situation was opposite than your dad's, because the company that he worked for noticed that there was something wrong and made Matt go to a doctor and then put him out on leave, put him out in disability. And the company doctor suspected dementia, but the other, like the neurologist where we live, said he was too young. So I'm glad in your dad's situation that they acknowledged that he had early onset instead of saying, oh, he's too young.
Yeah, I mean, that's the weird part too for us in this situation is my dad was like a phenomenal coach and teacher. I mean, that's been one of the biggest blessings of the last 4 or 5 years when I started sharing his story, is how many students have reached out to me and how many of his old football players and all these things, and really talked to me about the impact my dad had on their lives and just what a great teacher and coach was. But that makes me kind of reflect back on this journey of how it started. And you have a school that he dedicated 25, 30 years of changing kids' life and putting, spending so many hours in this, and then for them to think he was trying to scam the system. And it really it took a long time for me to get over the bitterness, I think, of that whole experience. And I'm still I'd like to think of myself as a better person and be able to forgive the people that we were in that room and that were questioning what we were doing. But I still don't know if I've completely forgiven what that, because I can't imagine what that made my dad feel like at the time of someone who's dedicated so much of his life to an organization, for them to like question his integrity. I don't want to, but I can't. I wouldn't be being honest if I said there wasn't some bitter feelings there still.
Well, I can definitely understand, Joe. It's like, okay, yeah, blame the person. Blame the person who has a memory problem, has this disease, And you're right, people do, step back because it does have to do with the brain, and they are fearful. And, you do see your friends and family depart. They don't have the support. And coworkers, they stop calling.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely saw that. Luckily for my dad, he had, you really do in terrible situations like this, it really does show who loves you and who's there for you. And we have some good family friends who stuck with us, but a lot of kind of mutual friends, mutual acquaintances, coworkers, and I kind of give people some slack because they just don't know how to handle it, because the school, just one day he was there and one day he wasn't and did not much explanation. I kind of cut them some slack, and but it is because it's a mental illness and people don't see it physically on someone. They don't know how to handle, and I think that's why it's so important for me to share his story, and Betsy, for you to share your story, is to get that stigma out that
right.
that mental illness is something that people have and that we need to deal with, and it's not something that we should be ashamed of, and so that's why it's so important to get that message out there.
Oh, I agree. Oh, I love you, Joe. I love what you stand for, what you're doing. I'm curious, Joe, did your dad get neuropsychological testing?
I don't remember all of the things that he went through. I know they did some CT scans, they did some MRIs, they did all the tests of, these 5 words, can you repeat them back to me? When is your birthday? All that stuff. Just in it, and every time, unfortunately, it just kept reinforcing that we just kept coming back to Alzheimer's time and time again.
The reason why I asked that is because, Matt was 56 when he was diagnosed, but he started like a year or two before, and when he went for neuropsychological testing, I didn't know what was going on at work at the time, but the neuropsychologist blamed Matt, saying that he couldn't be that bad, he wasn't cooperative. And I have heard this, my story, repeated in other people's lives, so that's why I was curious if your dad went through that. It's really sad that people don't believe us or the person who has the Alzheimer's or whatever, dementia, because, Matt looked healthy too. He looked fine. You would never know there was anything wrong with him. And, for people to think that your father was trying to scam and he was in the same place for so many years, I would be bitter too. I would be. I got to be honest. I would be very bitter.
And that's like so growing up, my dad was a football coach and teacher, and I mean, he put in the long hours, the extra time for the football practice, being gone till 6 or 7 at night, and because the love he had for his students and his players, ultimately you do sacrifice some time with your family. Like I would go and tag along with him all the time, but there were times where he had a football game and would have to miss my basketball game or something like that. So to know that he always, teaching and coaching was one of his top priorities, because he loved it and he cared about the students so much, and for him to miss on some stuff with his own family because of his extended family at work and stuff like that, and then to be treated like that, it was a very rough process to go through.
Yeah. Now, did you have trouble accepting your dad's disease?
So yes, to some degree. I think, looking back, and this is something I would give anyone who's going through a similar experience, you really take for granted those first few years. While you're trying to mentally process the acceptance of the disease, I think you kind of, you have no idea what the years are to come. So you kind of, take for granted that they're still mentally pretty there the first few years and a lot of the same person. And then, when you get to the later stages and you see that even more of that decline, you really do look back at those first years of diagnosis and wish you would have done more, wish you would have spent time more with them. Unfortunately,
yeah.
I briefly talked about some of the stuff that my dad was going through, but we didn't want to dwell on it. And I can't imagine, that's one of my biggest regrets is thinking maybe how strong he had to be for all of us, and who was there for him to actually have those discussions. I mean, he wasn't going to probably lay it on his 25-year-old son how scared he was because he was trying to be so brave. So it just breaks my heart to think about him kind of going through that and worrying about us so much that he probably didn't have much time to talk to anyone about how scared he was of how scary it is to start forgetting things.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely understand what you're saying. It's so devastating to get this diagnosis when your loved one looks normal, doing a little odd things, but it's just so shocking that it's just hard to grasp. Now, does Alzheimer's run in your dad's family?
No, it does not. So it's kind of, my dad's dad lived till he is about 86 and never had anything. His mother died maybe when she was about in her early 70s, but she never had any cognitive decline. And we've kind of looked through, and he has an older sister who's 3 or 4 years older than him, and she's nothing, and the same thing with his younger sister. So we're not entirely sure, the causes of what's going on, and so no, it doesn't. And so that's why it's also so shocking to us.
And did your father ever have a head injury, brain trauma of any kind?
So we've talked about that a lot. So my and this is kind of a good segue into to talk a little bit more about my dad. My dad was an amazing athlete growing up. He grew up in Iowa. He was on a starting running back for a high school football state championship team. Went to college, played 4 years. Almost. So it's a funny story. When he was in college, his senior year, he was an All-American college football player at William Penn, which is a smaller school in Iowa. And the NFL used to have like 12 or 15, I don't remember the exact number, rounds in the draft. But his senior year, they changed it and they moved down to 7 rounds, so a lot fewer players got drafted. And because him and my mom had no money, I mean, they were just college students, he didn't get drafted, but he would have if it was extended. And he got invitations from the 49ers, the Seahawks, the Cowboys to come out to their camps. But unfortunately, they just didn't have the money to travel to San Francisco or Texas or anything like that. So he really could have been a really good, professional football player if they would have made a couple of different decisions. The Cowboys had told him that they were going to draft him anyways in like the late 6th or 7th round of the NFL draft. And but they ended up trading all of their draft picks for Tony Dorsett, which worked out really well for them, I think. But so he did, have some concussions and did play football, so that could have had an impact. But the doctors couldn't say for sure that was the case, so we're not entirely sure at this point, like if there is that damage to the brain because of that or not, or if it's just a kind of a genetic thing. So we're just not sure.
Yeah, I was just curious, because I want to make this very clear to the audience, to the listeners, that your dad was diagnosed at 54 years old, a healthy, middle-aged man, no history in his family, and he has early onset because, people think it's a myth. Oh, I can't get it. It's not my family. I'm too young. No one's immune. And I wanted to make sure I really put that out there because I will never stop putting it out there about that.
Yeah, and incredibly healthy. Worked out his entire life. Didn't smoke. Drank occasional beer here and there, but nothing like that. And just out of nowhere. And we would have been that group that said that can't happen to us, and it did, and it is absolutely devastating, like you said.
And Joe, I know this is a loaded question. How does your father, having the Alzheimer's, you were young, so you were 24, you said. Did that stop you from your, advancing in your career or getting married? Did you put your life on hold? And how do you cope?
Yeah. So, luckily, I went to college and got my degree in political science, and then right after that I went and got my master's degree in public administration in Illinois. I'm from Illinois, and then I moved out to Colorado for about 9 months to work for the city of Denver. And then luckily, just at the time, this is before the diagnosis, a job opened up in the city of Peoria. That's where I'm from. And I was happy, my grandparents were getting older, so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to move back. And within about a year of moving back is when this all started happening. So, from that, I like to count my blessings, and I think that was a huge blessing for my mom and I. I also I do have an older brother who helps too, but he's just kind of not publicly sharing as much as I do. But he helps quite a bit too. But at the age of 24, it's really hard to process. So when you ask about, deciding what your priorities are, I would say it really hasn't hurt my career-wise. It's just definitely affected my personal life more than anything else, because you can only balance so much. So, I made the decision that, helping my mom take care of my dad. And so I moved back in, and I've lived with them maybe the last 10 years or so to help with this process. You can only balance so many things. So my career and my job, which I love, and taking care of my dad are really the only two things I have time for. So I really did, put a lot on hold of whether, I'm not married, I don't have kids, and it is because you just don't have time. You don't have time to do those things because, my mom goes through a lot of stress of worrying about me and putting my life on hold and having regrets for me. And I tell her I make this decision to help take care of Dad, and it's not something that she should beat herself up over. But she sees that, I do make sure, if I'm going to go do something, I need to do it around his schedule to make sure I can be home in case, she needs help showering with the bathroom and stuff. So there's just so many other things to balance. And then, this isn't something I overly talk about, but when I've always had growing up, I've been a little bit of a hypochondriac, and it's caused some anxiety issues. And then when I was about 26 or 27, when all this, he's starting to get a little worse, the anxiety issues really started coming on a lot stronger. And I've been on kind of anti-anxiety medicine the last 8 or 9 years to really cope with it. It was even to the point when it first started, before I got on the medication, I had a couple panic attacks that I go to the hospital and thinking, panic attack, because of this, you think you're having a heart attack, and you get there and like, no, your heart's good, everything, you're a healthy 27-year-old, you're just dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. And so it really has taken a huge toll on kind of my mental, thing, my mental livelihood because of the anxiety issues. And it's something I've learned to cope with, and I'm a very high-functioning, I think, anxiety patient at this point. But it is something that really has taken its toll, and I don't think I was prepared as a 25-year-old of what the journey was going to be ahead.
You're right. I mean, my son had to deal with his grandma first. So Josh was 15 or 16. So when his dad was diagnosed, he was probably 23 or 24. And, it's different because it's his dad. And I always tell, people, especially men, because society for some reason frowns on men saying they need help, and there's no shame in that. Everybody needs to go for counseling dealing with this disease, let me tell you, for your own sanity. And I'm glad you mentioned that you take medication. There's nothing wrong with that, and I want people to just stop the stigma that they have. Unless you live with someone and you take care of your parent or you take care of your spouse or whoever it is, you have no right to judge anybody for going for help or anything like that? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things with anxiety, and there is such a stigma for, especially, unfortunately for men, especially kind of young men in their 20s and 30s, because with anxiety, people can't look at you and know you have anxiety, but, the way my anxiety manifests is, my body gets tingly, like your heart races and things like that, and people don't want to talk about, people think it's a weakness, and that's been one of the things that I've made sure to talk about too, because it's not a weakness. It's something that you need help with this thing. And I think, from my standpoint, I made the decision to start sharing my dad's story and kind of being a little more open with it 4 or 5 years ago. But, that was 5 or 6 years into his journey. And, those first 5 or 6 years were so lonely. And part of that's on my end because I wasn't sharing what I was going through with what we were going through as a family, because you don't want to broadcast it everywhere. You're just processing everything. So I internalized a lot of that, and because I wasn't being open and sharing, I think I pushed a lot of people away in my life because of the anxiety issues and just not wanting to, if people don't see what you're going through, they, you think that there's judgment there. And so there's a lot of loneliness when it first starts because you're not sharing what you're going through, and you do push people away. And that's a big part of, unfortunately, what a lot of caregivers go through.
Yes, that's very true. Do you get to go out, Joe? Like I encourage my son. He would go to movies once a week or go to his buddy night once a month. Do you have any outlet to do self-care?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky that I have a really good group of friends that have really, wrapped their arms around me the last 5 or 6 years about this. And while I don't have any children, I do have 6 godsons. So with 3 different families, I'm their godfather of the boys that they have. And that's really one of my outlets, is just really spending time with the friends that I have. And they give me a lot of strength. And luckily I have, 5 or 6 really close friends, and they all have such different personalities. I have a really close friend, who's a good distraction from everything and doesn't internalize a bunch of things. So it's nice to have that distraction where we always don't have to talk about Alzheimer's. And then I have another couple close friends that I grew up with my whole life that are always there for me. And I take for granted that they grew up with my dad as well. So it's tragic for them. They know what my dad was like my whole life and what he was like. They were close to my dad. So, you can relate they can relate on that. And sometimes I forget how sad it must be for them too. Not only is one of their best friends going through this, but someone they know is also going through this in their life as well.
That's right. And I think we're going to see more people like my son, like you, Joe, and even younger, that are going to be taking care of their parents. And it's going to be tough because the baby boomers, which I'm one of them, and so your parents are aging, and the younger the parent, the younger the child is going to be, who's going to be a caregiver. And this is the thing. Are they going to, be like you, be like my son and step up, put your life on hold? There's a lot of issues when you are a young adult caregiver that I don't think people realize the toll that it takes. It takes a toll on a spouse. It takes a toll on, an adult child, even if they're not caregiving. But to be an adult caregiver, a child caregiver, I guess I'll call it, it's tough. I know it took a toll on Josh, my son, and it does take a toll. There's no doubt about it. And this is what I want to tell people, Joe, and you're telling them, because it needs to be addressed. There's so many issues that need to be addressed. The stigma of early onset, the stigma of Alzheimer's, the stigma of a young man like yourself to say, I need a medication, I need help. And I always say on my shows and even on my posts, there should be no shame at all for anybody to go for help. or to take a medication. None at all. It's the strong person who says, I need help, not the weak person. It takes the strong person. And it takes a strong person. Joe, you're very strong. I admire you for coming on to my show and sharing your story about your dad went through, what you're, going through. How is your dad now? Is he still at home?
Yeah. So, we were lucky. My mom. So about 3 years ago, my dad started getting where he couldn't be home by himself, and just started getting worse. And my mom was able to retire. So she's at home with him full time as a caregiver. He's definitely in the late stages where getting him to eat is really tough. Just getting him to focus on eating is really tough. So he's lost a lot of weight. He's at the point where he really can't communicate verbally any longer. And so, it just, really is such a hard thing to watch my dad because, I really want everyone to understand, he was such a great guy. He was, one of the greatest role models and dads a kid could ever ask for. I mean, he was one of my best friends my entire life. And, to not, that's what I really miss right now more than anything is not having, being able to go to him for career advice or life advice and really becoming, the person who takes care of him when it really should be something that is the other way around. And, to touch on your point a little bit about, children taking care of their parents, I've been shocked at when I have shared my story of how many people reach out to me and say, it's really remarkable that you're a son doing this. Most of the time it's a wife or a daughter or something like that. And, it makes me sad that men aren't stepping up more for that caregiver role. Because like you said, over the next 10 or 15 years, like this is an epidemic. Alzheimer's is going to get worse for so many people. And it can't be just, something that only certain people focus on. It really takes everyone. My mom couldn't do it without my brother and I couldn't do it without my brother and my mom. And it really takes everyone working together. And my dad, I'm going to touch on this a little because I love to talk about this piece of it. But, my mom and dad, luckily for my dad, my mom is an absolute saint being home with her. They actually met when they were in the second grade. They had a first communion class together. And then they started dating when they were about 14, got married when they were 21, and just have been the absolute loves of their lives their entire life. And, if anything, this disease has showed me, it showed, how much love a person can have for another. My mom, had to watch her husband go through this, and after looking forward to retiring and traveling and to put all of that aside and go through the daily struggle of this. And, bless her heart, she never gets frustrated with him. She never gets impatient with him. She might get impatient with me. I think sometimes she takes on some of it on me because she can't on him, which is fine. But just how much love she had for him and just their relationship and their love story, and for it to be so tragic and end like this, is really terrible. But at the same token, it's really beautiful to see, when they did their vows till death do they part in sickness and health, they really meant it.
Yes, and I'll tell you, Joe, I told this Josh the same thing. You learned unconditional love. You're taking
Absolutely.
care of your father, and your father can't repay you, and it's pure 100% unconditional love that you, your mom, your brother, given your dad, and it really is remarkable. I mean, my son, who has special needs, changed his father's diaper. If it wasn't for Josh, I could not have worked. Josh was really a blessing, and I know, he learned a lot from this, and it just really changes you and what's important in life. And it's really, it's an understatement to say that you go through a life-changing change in your life. Really, you're not the same person when you before and after, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just, on personal reflection of kind of how this has changed me, I've not that I was not a kind person but before this, but just kind of the empathy and the kindness you just have for everyone, because you never know what people are going through at home. So, people can have a really stressful day at work or just have a bad day and they have to go back home to this. So, it's made me be so much more patient with people. It's made me so much more compassionate for things going on and just being a kinder person. And also it's caused me to reflect a lot on kind of the person my dad was and just making sure I'm living up to the person he was and carrying his legacy forward, because, it does change you. And you really talked about unconditional love. And I think that's what's so interesting about Alzheimer's is it's being a caregiver. I say this in some of my posts, like, it's not rewarding. Like, it's not something I like. It's not something I enjoy. There's no moment where I'm reflect and think like, well, this is a rewarding experience. Like, it's terrible. And it's something I do because I love my father and I love my mother, and they did such a great job raising me that I owe it to them and I want to do it for them. But if anyone tells you, being a caregiver is a rewarding experience, it's not, helping, because it's caregiving is everything. It's from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, you have to take care of them, whether that's helping with, bathroom needs, with showering, with feeding them. You go through all that. And then there are times where I'm a caregiver for my mom from a sense of emotionally being there for her when she's upset with things. So, as a son to a parent, and you're providing that care, it's not a rewarding experience, but something I feel like every child should step up to the plate and do, because, parents bring you into this world and they give you a good life, and you should live up and you should pay that forward and pay that back to them. And that's really what I see this. So, but when people, it's not a glamorous job, and I'm sure you can understand that.
Yes, I know exactly what you're saying. Some people, get, even other caregivers can get very judgmental and say, oh, what do you mean it's not rewarding? Well, you know what? Because sometimes it just stinks. That's why. I see nothing pleasant about having to wipe my husband's rear end. I don't see any joy in that. There was joy in me showing him love and reassuring him, but it's not all, daisies at
Correct.
all. It's very, very, very stressful. Do you have any last words of wisdom to a person your age who's caregiving to give them, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing I can tell everyone is that it's hard, and it with Alzheimer's, it doesn't ever get easier. It's not like you get through this point and things will get better. I mean, the only out of Alzheimer's is they die. There's no cure, there's no treatment, there's nothing right now. And so the only kind of thing you not look forward to, but the only thing to end all of it is them dying, which is a terrible thought too. So just hang in there, lean on your friends. And, that's one of the things I've had to learn with is because of what I'm going through, there is some resentment sometimes with some of my friends who aren't going through this, and they're great. And I've talked to them, and it's kind of an internal resentment where, if they don't have time to do something because they're living their life, you do get a little, sad, depressed about it, and that's okay. And I think just making sure your friends and the people in your life understand what you're going through. So if you are acting a little neurotic or a little resentful or pushing people away, just making sure they understand what you're going through and what you're experiencing, so they know not to take it personal, just that you don't. And, really the more and more we can all do to share our stories and share how terrible Alzheimer's is, more people become aware of it for two things. A, we can hopefully find a cure and really put our resources to finding a treatment and cure one day. But also, until we get to that point, just being supportive of caregivers, because it's a life-changing event, because, the emotional toll caregiving takes on someone is terrible. But then there's the actual exhausting physical nature of providing the care. And those things coupled together, especially going through a world where we're in the middle of a pandemic and all that, just can be really stressful on people. So, and then my last word of advice for people who are listening to this who might not be a caregiver but might know someone who's a caregiver, really, really reach out to them. I hate asking people for help. That's just not in my nature. So I hate when people say, well, let me know if you need anything. Like, I'm not going to tell you what I need. like I'm not. I have too much going on. I'm not going to deal with if you don't deliver how much sadness and depression that causes. So if you have a family member or a friend who's being a caregiver for someone in their life, you be the one who reaches out to them and provide them with either just love, your time, your energy. Most of the time we just want someone to listen to, someone to be there for us, someone to make time for us, to go out of their way to show us they care. But don't put them in a position where they have to tell you what they want because they're not, and that just causes more loneliness for them. So anyone who's listening to this who knows someone who's a caregiver, just make sure you're being there for them as much as you can because it's really tough.
Oh, yes, I agree 100%, Joe. I say this, all the time, that caregivers just want someone to, an ear for listening to arms to give them a hug. Well, not that we're allowed to now, but that was before the pandemic, and a shoulder to lean on, without judgment. And, it's not rocket science. Send a card, send a gift card, send a text, call up. It's not difficult. And thank you for mentioning that. Thank you for coming on and sharing. And people can reach you on your Facebook page at Joe, Joe Dulin, Dulin.
It's on Facebook. It's Joseph Dulin, Josephdulin.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. And I want to suggest to the listeners, please look up Joseph Dulin's page and read about his inspiring, raw, emotional, true post, because Joe is a lot like me. He doesn't sugarcoat. He tells it like it is. And I love that because we need to tell our stories. We need to show our journeys. I've been saying this for 3 years. And I used to go in my car and video and say this. We need to speak up. This month, September, which I can't believe it's almost half over with, is World Alzheimer's Awareness Month. September 21st is World Alzheimer's Awareness Day. Caregivers, past and present, show your journey. Show the past journey. Post on your page. And don't worry about what people think. Just post on your page because we need to put a face and a name to this horrible disease. And people need to see it. And I don't care if I offend anybody or not, because I really don't at this point in my life. They need to see it. And I want to thank you again, Joe, for coming on and sharing your story and your dad's life. I appreciate it. And, hugs to you. And, I recommend counseling for everyone because sometimes you just need it. And folks, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind. And if you missed any of this podcast, you can listen to it on Spotify, Spreaker, Google, and wherever there are podcast media sites. We're on there. I'm on there. And just be kind, folks. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Passion World Talk Radio. Till we chat again, be blessed. Bye-bye now.